Envision this. A Russian supply depot 80 miles beyond the front lines. Vehicles pulling in. Munitions boxes being offloaded. Soldiers moving quickly. A vital resupply mission that, if completed, will fuel a fresh offensive against Ukrainian forces within hours. Ukrainian intelligence has verified the position. The countdown is running now. A year earlier, Ukraine's choices would have been severely restricted. A long-range drone would require 90 minutes to reach, if it even survived Russian interference. A Storm Shadow cruise missile could hit it. But deploying one demands British intelligence authorization that might take hours to arrive. And ATACMS, the US provided tactical ballistic missile that would be ideal for precisely this type of objective. Ukraine depleted those completely by late January 2025. According to the Associated Press, referencing both a US representative and a Ukrainian legislator on the Defense Committee, fewer than 40 of those weapons were ever delivered to Ukraine in total, fewer than 40 for an entire conflict. But now, in early 2026, there is a fresh solution to that situation. A solution created not in a Pentagon research center, not in a British defense installation, but in a hidden facility in Kyiv by a crew that includes a former movie producer, a qualified architect, and a collection of engineers who began by purchasing moped motors for strike drones. That solution is named the FP7. It traverses those 80 miles in approximately 3 minutes. The individuals in that supply depot won't detect it approaching until it is already present. This is the account of Ukraine's most significant homegrown weapons creation in the complete duration of this conflict. And if you want to remain informed of these developments as they progress, make sure you subscribe to Bradley Madden right now. We address the armaments, the tactics, and the choices influencing this conflict every single day. And you do not want to skip what follows next, because what arrives after the FP7 is even more remarkable. Let's begin with the fundamentals, and then we are going to explore why each figure matters far more than it initially seems. The FP7 is a short-range tactical ballistic missile manufactured by Firepoint, a private Ukrainian defense enterprise based in Kyiv. It has a stated engagement range of up to 200 kilometers, which is roughly 124 miles. Its top velocity is 1,500 meters per second, which converts to approximately 3,350 miles per hour, or nearly Mach 4.5. At maximum trajectory, the weapon ascends to an elevation of around 40 miles, deep into the stratosphere. Its explosive payload weighs approximately 150 kilograms, or 330 pounds. The circular error probable, the technical gauge of how accurately a missile consistently lands near its designated objective, sits at around 14 meters. And from firing to impact, the complete flight requires a maximum of 250 seconds, 4 minutes and 10 seconds, shorter than a commercial intermission. As documented by Ukraine's Kaprata and verified by Defense Express, the FP7's initial public test firing occurred on February 27, 2026. Firepoint's lead designer and co-founder, Dennis Stylerman, shared the recording on X with a brief caption, "Welcome FP7." The recording displays the weapon departing its ground-based platform, the solid fuel engine activating at the instant of launch, and the armament accelerating smoothly up the firing rail into the atmosphere. Now, let's be specific about what that recording demonstrates and what it doesn't. The recording verifies that the FP7 exists as a genuine physical armament system. It verifies successful firing from a ground installation. It verifies stable propelled flight during the acceleration phase. What it does not reveal is a final impact against a surface objective. There is no outside confirmation of the distance figure, the CP precision number, or the elevation maximum from that recording alone. But here's where the background becomes critical, because characterizing the FP7 as a weapon that could function fundamentally misrepresents how Ukrainian defense innovation operates in wartime. This is not the US acquisition process, where an armaments program spends years in evaluation before a media release goes out. This is not a defense manufacturer conducting a media event about a prototype vehicle. Ukraine's defense enterprises develop under combat, refine at velocity, and reveal selectively. They do not publicize things to attract investor attention. They publicize things when those things are actual. Look at the FP5 Flamingo cruise missile. According to coverage by Euromaidan Press, that platform followed a nearly identical development path. It was unveiled, briefly, presented publicly, and then employed operationally within a compressed time window. The Ukrainian public primarily discovered about its battlefield deployment through President Volodymyr Zelensky's own declarations after operations had already taken place. Firepoint produces over half of Ukraine's long-range strike drones, according to Ukraine's general staff. These are not individuals who publicize things prematurely for the publicity. And there's a vital piece of detail from a March 16th conversation that Stelman provided to Channel 24 as covered by United 24 Media. He wasn't characterizing a concept model. He stated directly, "We've already performed a flight. Now we're transitioning to evaluation on our dear neighbors." That expression means the FP7 is shifting from controlled test flights to actual battlefield deployment against Russian objectives. Manufacturing, he verified, has already commenced even before the platform has finished the formal military classification process. The company embraced this strategy deliberately to avoid manufacturing delays once official authorization comes through. This is an armament that is being produced right now as you view this content. Additionally, as Irina TK, CEO and co-founder of Firepoint, informed United 24 Media, the initial test firing surpassed internal projections, and not by a narrow margin. She indicated that the platform reached its intended technical benchmarks during the preliminary evaluations, adding, "We anticipated such outcomes from attempt number 5 or 7. That is a declaration about a development initiative that is progressing ahead of timeline, not trailing it. So when Stylerman characterized the FP7 to Army TV as a counterpart to ATACMS that will cost at minimum half the amount, he was not proposing a concept. He was outlining a manufacturing actuality. And that price comparison carries tremendous significance because it reaches the essence of why this armament transforms Ukraine's strategic calculation in a manner that extends far beyond any individual technical characteristic. But before we proceed any further, if you're not currently subscribed to Bradley Madden, now is the moment. Press that subscribe button and activate notifications. Every day, we release analysis on the armaments, the statistics, and the choices that are genuinely driving this conflict. The variety of thorough examination that you won't discover in a 30-second news clip. Now, returning to why the FP7 carries such importance. And to genuinely grasp it, we need to clarify the challenge it addresses, because that challenge is actually two distinct challenges stacked on top of each other. The first challenge is the ATACMS shortage. As referenced at the beginning of this content, Ukraine consumed its complete inventory of US-delivered ATACMS ballistic missiles by late January 2025. According to coverage from the Associated Press, the Kyiv Independent, and Newsweek, U.S. representatives confirmed that fewer than 40 weapons were ever provided to Ukraine in total. 40, for perspective, as one comprehensive examination observed, in the initial days of the U.S. campaign in Iraq in 2003, American troops launched roughly 800 ATACMS in a span of days. Ukraine obtained 40 across the complete scope of a multi-year conflict, and they depleted them. When those weapons were accessible, they were game-changing. ATACMS operations eliminated Russian S-400 launchers, headquarters posts, helicopter assembly areas, and munitions warehouses deep beyond the front lines. They were, in the expression of President Zelensky, when Ukraine initially obtained them in October 2023, armaments that demonstrated their worth, but they arrived with two critical limitations. First, they were limited. Second, their deployment required American political clearance that was inconsistent, especially after the Trump administration assumed power in early 2025 and essentially halted ATACMS shipments. The incoming administration's approach toward Ukraine changed dramatically, and with it availability to the one category of armament best designed for time-critical deep engagement missions against moving or semi-stationary objectives. That is the strategic void the FP7 occupies. Not because it is more powerful than ATACMS in every aspect. It isn't. ATACMS delivers a considerably larger explosive payload, but the FP7 is domestically manufactured, meaning Ukraine requires no authorization from any outside government to deploy it. According to coverage by Euromaidan Press, Stylerman characterized both the FP7 and the bigger FP9 as being constructed around a fundamental principle: make ballistic missiles affordable enough to launch in volume rather than preserve them like limited Western equipment. That change in methodology is massive. One of the most constraining realities for Ukrainian strategists throughout this conflict has been what some observers have characterized as a usage restrictions challenge. At any particular instant, Ukrainian forces were utilizing British Storm Shadows with one group of limitations, French Scalp missiles with a slightly altered group, ATACMS with still another, and HIMARS with stipulations connected to particular munition variants. Each armaments platform carried its own political usage limitations. Each had distinct authorized objective categories, distinct geographic parameters, and distinct clearance processes that ran through distinct capitals with distinct domestic political considerations. An FP7 arrives with none of that. It arrives with a firing key and an objective coordinate. The second challenge the FP7 resolves is even more essential. It is the challenge of timing. Ukraine's long-range engagement campaign using the FP1 drone family has been remarkably successful. According to coverage by United 24 Media, Ukrainian military documentation attributes roughly 59% of long-range engagement missions and about 54% of verified objective impacts to FP1 platforms. These drones have attacked oil processing plants, munitions warehouses, military production complexes, and radar stations deep inside Russian territory. They are the foundation of Ukraine's deep engagement capability, but they're gradual. An FP1 directed at an objective deep inside Russia could be airborne for the greater part of a day. That is suitable for attacking permanent infrastructure that isn't relocating. An oil processing plant will still be present in 12 hours. A railway intersection will still be present tomorrow, but the combat zone operates on a completely different schedule. A Russian armored formation assembling for an attack does not pause 90 minutes for a drone to show up. A forward headquarters established in a farmhouse can be active for 3 hours and then vacated. Russian air defense platforms, which are specifically engineered to be portable and repositionable, can be relocated between the instant a drone is dispatched and the instant it shows up. Here's where the FP7 velocity becomes a critical operational instrument rather than merely a technical characteristic. Consider a practical illustration. Ukrainian intelligence identifies a Russian air defense radar station that has just powered up 40 miles beyond the engagement line. This radar is directing interceptors against Ukrainian drones and producing a mission-essential disruption. A long-range drone cannot show up in time before the radar either finishes its operational cycle or gets relocated. A Storm Shadow could engage it, but demands political coordination. An FP7 dispatched from a concealed location reaches that objective in under 2 minutes. The radar personnel has no meaningful reaction window. The intercept opportunity for Russian air defenses, which relies on early identification and target monitoring, contracts to near zero. That velocity advantage is directly connected to the missile's ballistic flight pattern, which brings us to the third aspect of why the FP7 is a genuine challenge to Russian protective systems. Particularly, Russia has spent 3 years adjusting its air defense framework to counter Ukraine's primary engagement profile. That primary profile is low-altitude, subsonic, or transonic terrain-following flight. The FP1 drone functions this way. So do cruise missiles like the Storm Shadow. Russia's complete layered defense arrangement from the Panzer S-1 short-range platform to the longer-range S-400 has been substantially configured toward identifying and neutralizing threats arriving at low elevation. The radar systems are tuned for it. The intercept procedures are constructed around it. The operator preparation is refined for it. A ballistic missile performs the reverse. After firing, the FP7 rises sharply to over 40 miles. At that height, the atmosphere is sparse enough that standard aerodynamic interception becomes exceptionally challenging. It then drops in a sharp re-entry path, gaining speed under gravity, approaching close to Mach 4.5 in the final phase. The Panzer S-1, Russia's most extensively fielded short-range platform, is constructed to counter targets traveling up to approximately Mach 3 under perfect engagement circumstances. At Mach 4.5, on a sharp descent path, the intercept opportunity shrinks to seconds. The mathematics are simply uncompromising. The S-400 is Russia's most proficient long-range platform and is theoretically able of countering ballistic objectives. But achieving so requires early identification, exact targeting information, and a clear engagement setting. To intercept the FP7, Russian S-400 operators would need to identify the original firing and have adequate information to calculate the missile's endpoint while it is still in its acceleration phase before it reaches the apex of its path. That is an extraordinarily challenging tactical demand, especially under circumstances of volume or unexpectedness. And Russia has an even more profound challenge here. It cannot allocate its S-400 platforms exclusively to ballistic threat management. The ongoing drone and cruise missile operations Ukraine has sustained since 2022 perpetually requires S-400 radar assets for low-altitude monitoring and intercept management. If Ukraine starts employing the FP7 together with its current drone and cruise missile inventory, Russian air defense leaders face an essentially unresolvable prioritization dilemma. Do you direct the platform skyward to detect ballistic threats, or do you maintain it scanning low for the drones? You cannot accomplish both optimally at the identical time. That conflict is a force multiplier, and it functions whether or not the FP7 launches a single round. Now, let's examine the launcher because it is every bit as significant as the weapon itself, and it has gotten somewhat less focus in initial coverage than it warrants. Conventional ballistic missile systems are linked with large, conspicuous launch platforms. Consider the Russian Iskander system, which Ukraine has been engaging throughout this conflict because of the devastation it has inflicted on Ukrainian communities and civilian facilities. The Iskander launcher is unmistakably a weapons system. It cannot be confused with a transport truck. It cannot be hidden in a regular warehouse without considerable preparation. Its movements produce a traceable signature. Its support facilities generate logistical markers that intelligence platforms can monitor. The FP7 adopts a completely different methodology. As Stylerman explained to Army TV and as documented by Euromaidan Press, Firepoint engineered the weapon to fire from mobile systems disguised as regular vehicles. The complete firing complex utilizes a hot launch arrangement, meaning the solid fuel engine activates directly at the instant of firing from an exposed, angled guide rail. This removes the requirement for a launch container or vertical canister, substantially simplifying the launcher's physical shape. The complete system rests on a standard trailer base towable by a standard military or civilian vehicle, storable in buildings that would not appear as weapons depots to surveillance photography. According to Euromaidan Press, the complete firing complex can be prepared to launch in approximately 15 minutes from reaching a deployment position. 15 minutes. After the weapon fires, the vehicle departs. The deployment position is vacant before any counter-battery sensors can coordinate a retaliatory engagement. This is the relocate and launch methodology that has made HIMARS so challenging for Russia to eliminate throughout this conflict, now implemented to a ballistic missile system. And because the launcher is compact and comparatively affordable to manufacture, Ukraine can potentially deploy many of them concurrently. A conventional ballistic missile unit requires specialized operators, dedicated support platforms, and considerable logistics infrastructure. A trailer-based system with a solid fuel engine and a streamlined firing rail requires far less of all three. That produces more firing positions spread across a broader geographic zone, which renders the complete system considerably harder to find, engage, and neutralize. Now, the explosive payload size is worth analyzing in some depth because it reveals precisely what category of objectives the FP7 was engineered to eliminate, and that engineering rationale is intentional. At one extreme, the Hellfire missile, the cornerstone of Western close-air assistance for decades, delivers an explosive charge of roughly 20 pounds. It is constructed for specific vehicles, lightweight structures, and troop groupings. At the other extreme, the Storm Shadow cruise missile delivers approximately 990 pounds of directed explosive specifically designed to breach hardened reinforced buildings, subterranean bunkers, and extensively fortified headquarters facilities. The FP7 occupies the center with a 330 pounds explosive charge and a circular error probable of 14 meters. That pairing reveals something very particular. This weapon is not constructed to send an explosive through a bunker air shaft. It is constructed to eliminate radar stations, above-ground headquarters posts, munitions storage buildings, supply centers, bridge sections, and railway connections. At 14 meters precision with a 330 pounds explosive charge, it will dependably disable any above-ground military installation at objectives. It will bring down buildings, eliminate parked equipment, and render supply corridors impassable. What it will not accomplish is breach deeply buried, reinforced facilities. But as the discussion of this account correctly identifies, Russia has not had the opportunity or stability to build that variety of reinforced, deep facilities near the Ukrainian engagement line. The objectives the FP7 can engage and eliminate are precisely the objectives that matter most for operational-level Ukrainian engagement planning. Here's another aspect that warrants more consideration than it commonly receives in discussion of this platform: the engineering heritage. As documented by Defense Express and verified by the Defense Post, the FP7's aerodynamic shape is derived from the 48N6, the interceptor weapon employed in Russia's own S-400 air defense platform. Firepoint's developers took that Soviet-era aerodynamic form, reconstructed it with a composite carbon fiber structure, substituted the propulsion mechanism entirely, and converted from the 48N6 original cold firing method to the hot firing arrangement. They essentially borrowed the form of Russia's own interceptor weapon and converted it into a ballistic engagement armament directed back at Russian units. There is something nearly symbolic about that engineering decision. And it was not coincidental. The 48N6 aerodynamic shape is thoroughly documented, validated, and aerodynamically optimized for precisely the flight parameters the FP7 needs to function within. By beginning from a recognized geometry, Firepoint's crew was able to condense the development schedule substantially while incorporating contemporary electronics, Ukrainian-produced solid fuel, and modernized navigation systems. The outcome, according to documentation from multiple Ukrainian defense sources, is a weapon that Firepoint builds nearly completely internally. The propulsion, the navigation mechanisms, the flight management electronics, the only element obtained externally is the explosive payload itself. That degree of vertical consolidation in a domestic defense initiative launched in 2022 by individuals who before the conflict were a movie producer, an architect, and a collection of engineers driven by dissatisfaction at inflated drones is one of the more extraordinary manufacturing accounts of this complete conflict. But now we need to examine where the FP7 fits in the wider Firepoint development plan. Because the FP7 is not the endpoint, it is a bridge. Firepoint's product range reveals a unified strategic narrative. The FP1 family of long-range engagement drones delivers deep engagement at distances up to 1,600 kilometers with an emphasis on permanent infrastructure objectives operating at low elevation and achieving durability through concealment rather than velocity. The FP2 intermediate range versions balance distance and explosive load differently, offering a more focused engagement option at decreased distance. The FP5 Flamingo cruise missile, as documented by Euromaidan Press, has a distance of up to 3,000 kilometers and an explosive charge of 150 kilograms. It has already been deployed operationally in deep engagements against Russian military production objectives. Each platform represents a tier in an increasingly thorough domestic engagement framework. The FP7, as we have explored in depth, occupies the medium-range ballistic level, rapid, portable, free from foreign limitations, and specifically constructed to challenge the air defense and supply infrastructure that shields Russian frontline activities. And then there is the FP9. As verified by Stylerman in a conversation with Army TV and documented by Euromaidan Press, the FP9 is presently in its concluding pre-test preparation stage. The anticipated distance is up to 855 kilometers, more than 5 times the FP7's distance. Its top velocity is anticipated at 2,200 meters per second, quicker than the FP7 by a considerable degree. The explosive payload registers at approximately 800 kilograms. The precision at roughly 20 mzp is marginally lower than the FP7's, but still operationally exact for the category of objectives it would be employed against. According to documentation by the defense-industry.eu outlet, Stylerman indicated in March 2026 that at the start of the summer of 2026, evaluations of the new FP9 short-range ballistic missile should commence. Developers are presently finishing creation of the propulsion mechanism, which remains one of the concluding elements before evaluation can start. Calculate the implications on those figures and the ramifications become significant. An 855 kilometers distance armament launched from central Ukraine positions the Russian capital within hypothetical engagement distance. Launched from locations near the current engagement zone in eastern Ukraine, an FP9 could engage every Russian military installation, every supply center, every defense production facility in the occupied regions, and a substantial portion of southern Russia itself. This would be as the discussion of this armament has repeatedly emphasized the first domestically manufactured ballistic missile in Ukraine's history with authentic strategic engagement capability. Britain acknowledged this deficiency separately. As documented by the Kyiv Post in January 2026, the British Ministry of Defense initiated a competition under Project Nightfall to create ground-fired ballistic missiles with a distance exceeding 500 kilometers for prospective deployment in Ukraine. The creation schedule being targeted would potentially render the armament accessible in late 2026. Ukraine, through Firepoint, seems to be approaching operational readiness on a comparable or quicker schedule through completely domestic creation. The geopolitical importance of that correspondence cannot be exaggerated. Western governments have spent years meticulously controlling which armaments they provide to Ukraine, under what stipulations, and with what territorial limitations, all in an attempt to regulate escalation danger. The creation of native ballistic missile capability by Ukraine transforms that equation. Ukraine does not need to request. It does not need to pause for an authorization procedure. It does not need to manage the intricate political limitations that, as one thorough examination characterized it, produced a circumstance where someone inside the Ukrainian General Staff had to preserve a continuously refreshed chart of which armament could be launched at which objective under which stipulations, with clearance processes running through multiple distinct foreign capitals concurrently. For most of this conflict, Russia's most persistent strategic benefit has not been its air forces, which have been primarily kept distant from Ukrainian airspace. It has not been its naval forces, which have experienced substantial setbacks. If you want to comprehend the complete background of how Russia's air defense shortcomings are intensifying under these emerging pressures, make sure you review our newest thorough examination on the S-400's performance history in this conflict. And subscribe to Bradley Madden for daily reporting on the armaments, the tactics, and the choices defining the conflict in Ukraine and military developments across the globe. Activate notifications so you don't overlook a single development. We will be monitoring this attentively, and so should you.